Yes, hello everyone. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you. This is Isam Khashoggi speaking. I'm the Business Development Manager in ACET Solution in the KSA market. Today we have the webinar of this OT cybersecurity webinar titled to talk about the active network scanning in the OT environment. It's a pleasure to have you all. First, let's talk about the housekeeping rules for this webinar. You are not allowed or supposed to turn on your camera. This is an only listening only webinar. It's not allowed also to turn on your mics at any time. If you have any questions, you can keep note of these questions until the open discussion time or it's being asked for. For this webinar, our cybersecurity consultant, Mr. Mubarik Mustafa, will be leading this webinar about the same topic of active network scanning in OT environment. Mubarak, do let me know if you want to share your screen.
Yes, thank you very much, Assam. My screen is already shared. Thank you for the introduction. Hello, everyone. We will wait a couple of minutes because I see that some people are still joining. So let's give everybody a couple of minutes to join. In the meantime, how about just read what you see on the screen? It's not necessarily, it's kind of related to what we will be discussing today. So just go ahead and read what it says. All right, so we're going to go ahead and start. Let's start with uh, a couple of questions. So I'll ask Maimuna to start with the first one. All right, so the first one says, have you ever performed or have been involved in active network scanning in an OT environment, in an operational OT environment? So not just like a factory floor or test bed, but in a really real operational OT system. All right, let's move on to, seems like a few of you have done this, so let's move on to the next one, which says that if you have you ever experienced any negative impacts to the industrial facility operation or to the OT environment itself? So if you have done the scanning yourself or if you have seen somebody else do it, has it ever negatively impacted uh, either the operation of the facility, like, have you caused a shutdown? If you haven't caused a shutdown, you're not an OT security engineer yet, because I have. All right, so a couple of folks have caused shutdown. A couple have never caused a shutdown, and most have no experience, which is fine. Let's move on to the next one quickly, please. Three of you have caused shutdown. I'd love to talk to you guys. All right, the next one is that have you ever used or seen network monitoring systems in an All right, can you hear me? All right. So don't know when did you lose me, but that's okay because I was just talking about introduction to what control systems are, and I'm sure even if you couldn't hear me, that's fine. I'm sure you were able to understand that I'm just trying to depict what the OT environment is. So I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on this, but these are some of the examples of OT environment. If you missed that part, I'm sure you'll recognize some of these keywords, DCS, safety instrumented system, ESD system, SCADA, PLC, RTU. If you recognize any of these, I'm sorry, if you recognize any of these words or terms, then you understand what OT systems are. So these are basically electronic computer systems that are utilized by industrial facility to operate safely. All right, so now that we are hopefully aligned on what OT systems are, let's talk a little bit about active network scanning, what exactly it is. So simply put, passive scanning is when you're eavesdropping. So you can see this funny looking guy, thanks to ChatGPT. I don't like the picture, but that's the best ChatGPT could come up with. It has some very nasty pictures that it came up with, so I had to pick one. So whatever, it depicts what I'm trying to say. That passive scanning is eavesdropping. People are talking, communicating with each other, and you're just listening in without interrupting the communication in any way. As opposed to that, active scanning is when you're talking, hopefully not shouting. We'll see, actually, you can shout on the network as well. We'll talk about that. But you're actively asking people questions. Hey, who are you? How are you? What's your name? What do you do? So when you're actively asking questions and trying to seek answers, that is active scanning. In computer world, what that would look like, maybe, there are different ways to do passive and active scanning, but just to make a point, for instance, if you have a network switch with a few devices connected to it, you may configure one of the ports as a mirror or span port on the switch if the switch supports it. And you can run some software here, either something as simple as Wireshark or other sophisticated packet capturing software, which basically all the packets that are going back and forth between different computers, different devices, are copied to this machine, and then you can analyze those packets to see what's going on the network. So this is, I don't really call it scanning, it's passive listening, I would say. Scanning is not the right word, but whichever way you want to describe it. The passive part is where there is no active question asked. It's just listening mode, spying mode, if you may. As opposed to as opposed to that, active scanning means that you have some kind of a command that is going out to different devices, and you're getting some response in return, and that's basically what you're looking for to gather the information from the network. So why do we need active scanning? Well, if you ask me, it's just fun because think about it. You sit on a network, you have a computer connected, you install ZenMap, you just downloaded it, you're learning about it, and you say, hey, what is this quick scan thing? Let me do the quick scan. Oh, what is an intense scan? How about we try and do the intense scan? So it's a lot of fun. But obviously, you wouldn't do you wouldn't do that in an industrial control systems environment just because it is fun. So the real use cases are that you need visibility into your network. All right, you need to, for example, discover assets that are on the network, something as basic as what IP addresses are present on the network. You may want to actively discover vulnerabilities on the network. You may need to validate your networks and assets data, or like we said earlier, the question was asked that have you ever used a network monitoring system? Just for network management or network monitoring, you may need to do some active scanning to see what is going on in the network. There are different levels of intensity of active scanning. Some things are very basic and some are a little bit more intense. We'll see that shortly. In the past, a lot of people ask about what scanning tools we can use, for example. Well, the most useful scanning tool is ping. I think that anybody who has spent any time in an industrial facility, I'm sure you've pinged a device, pinged a PLC or something, and still it is to some level network scanning. Even if you're doing it manually or you're doing it one IP address at a time, or you may be using an IP scanner that, okay, scan the complete subnet 192.168.1.1/24 or something, and it will ping all the IP addresses on that subnet and give you a result of which one is live, which one is not. Nmap is considered probably the de facto. In most cases, people use it to do the scanning. And there are some other vulnerability scanning tools. There are lots of them. You can Google them, Nessus, or even some intrusion detection systems like Nozomi, they also have active scanning. Smart, they used to call it smart polling, but it's basically they also do active scanning to get information from the network. A lot of these tools are very, very commonly used in IT. In fact, it's almost like a given that any decent sized IT network, you would have some kind of either a scanning tool or network monitoring tool to manage and monitor the network traffic, network devices, and all those things. Not so common in the OT environment, as you all also responded to the initial questions, that it's not common to consciously do scanning. And the reason I'm saying consciously is that unconsciously or subconsciously, we do network scanning quite a bit. We'll talk about that. And especially if there is a malware on the network, it is possible that the malware itself is doing active scanning without your knowledge. So what's all the fuss about? Why can't we do active scanning on OT environment? So let's spend a few minutes diving a little bit deeper into the OT environment considerations when it comes to active scanning. You have to remember just two things. When you talk about active scanning, there are only two things that are important to remember. One is availability, and I know it has been overused. Everybody talks about the CIA triad, and it is flipped in case of control system and all that. Yes, 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 but it is still a fact that availability is the king in industrial environment. Why? Because let's say this was a whatever refinery or petrochemical complex or whatever, the control system is operating it, it's gonna keep operating for years and years. You're not gonna just, shut down a PLC or do something that causes the PLC to shut down or malfunction, or the network to malfunction in any way that just disrupts the operation of the industrial facility. So availability is the king, but we already know that, most of us. What is not explicitly stated, and I want to state that over here, is that in the OT environment, the communication is much more deterministic than it is in the IT environment. All right, we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail going forward, but just remember, these are the only two considerations that you need to remember when you talk about active scanning. Everything else is just auxiliary and is not as critical as these two. So let's see, I made a very awesome looking control system architecture. You should admire my drawing over here. This looks beautiful compared with the previous screen, at least to my eyes. But I made a very basic control system architecture. A few PLCs down here connected through a nice looking Ethernet switch, 4-port Ethernet switch. I don't know how many of you have seen that. If you haven't seen it, then you are not an OT security engineer. But all right, so PLC is connected to the switch, and then onwards to maybe a SCADA server, which is connected to another switch, which has an engineering workstation, an operator workstation, and possibly a historian. So very basic, very simplistic, but beautiful control system architecture. So let's talk about these two terms. What do we mean by these? Availability. So there are different levels of availability we talk about. At the end of the day, remember, we don't want to disrupt anything. We don't want to cause any disruption to plant operation, to the industrial facility operation. What does that mean? So this PLC over here, it is basically going in a loop. It has some program that is configured, programmed in it, which is executing every, 100 milliseconds, for example, or 50 milliseconds. And it keeps going, executing. And it needs to continue to do that on the same, I guess, time frame. If this PLC stops functioning, for example, then all the inputs and outputs it is controlling would go back to some predefined state. I'm not gonna talk, this is not a control systems class right now, but just understand that if this PLC shuts down or stops functioning or goes into some kind of a blue screen of death mode or crashes, that means that the plant operation will be disrupted. So that's basically one of the availability concerns that we have, that we don't want to do anything on the network that causes this PLC to stop functioning or malfunction or crash in any way. That's one part of the availability. Another aspect of the availability is that obviously when this PLC is doing whatever it's doing, the data is communicated to some kind of maybe a server, and from that server it goes to an operator workstation, some kind of an HMI, human machine interface, to display the values on the screen for the operator. Not only do we not want this PLC to stop functioning, we also want this communication to happen in a very deterministic way. A few milliseconds of a delay and maybe a second of a delay may not be as big of a deal for the operator sitting on the HMI, but in general, the values that the operators see on the operator workstation, they need to update at a certain frequency so that the operator can see what is going on and maybe take action if an action is required. And when the operator does click a button to open or close a valve or start or stop a pump or any other equipment, we also want that command to be communicated to the PLC immediately within a second or so, and the PLC would execute that command and take the action or shut down the pump. So we don't want this communication to be disrupted. That's the second level of availability, that even if the PLC itself is functioning properly, we don't want this network to be loaded in a way that the communication is disrupted significantly. Even worse than that is that in some cases, not a lot, and I'm sure a lot of you may challenge this, that there is no much communication that happens between PLCs that is critical. But I have seen that in my experience. I agree with you, it's not very common, but it's also not unheard of that there is active communication going on between PLCs where some data is transmitted from one PLC to another, and the other PLC has to take action based on the data received. And depending upon the criticality of the data, the second PLC may have a timeout programmed that if you stop receiving data from PLC 1, shut down the plant. And this is not just a hypothetical example that I'm giving. I've actually seen or worked in facilities where such configuration, such programming was done, that if the communication is not received for X seconds, and maybe it's usually 1 to 2 seconds, okay, this PLC will say, hey, my neighbor is not talking to me, and it may result in some unwanted condition in the plant, so I will shut down the plant. All right, so that means that even if both PLCs, if we say, well, the PLCs themselves are not gonna crash, but if I overload this network enough for the PLCs to stop communicating in the deterministic time frame that we have required them to, that would also potentially cause disruption to the facility. Similarly, one last case over here, that you have something up here that's called historian. If the data is going only for the display for the operator workstation, usually, let's say it is supposed to update every second. If it becomes 1.5 seconds, it's not a big deal because the operators are human beings and their response time may not be as fast or as quick that they can maybe even detect a half a second delay. But historians typically, what they do is they collect the data, and I'm giving one type of example scenario, that they collect the data and they put a timestamp on it, that this particular event happened at 7:05 p.m. With 14 seconds. 7:05 p.m. 15 seconds, 7:05 p.m. 16 seconds. So the historian is collecting data every second. If there is a delay in that communication, then the timestamp may be off by a second or so. And sometimes, in certain cases, depending upon what the use case is, you don't even, that 1 second of offset is not acceptable. So this is basically the definition of deterministic communication, that whatever the communication frequency is configured in this whole system, either between PLCs, from PLCs to HMI, or from PLCs to historians, that needs to happen at the predefined interval. And obviously, the worst case scenario where we overload, let's say, this network to the extent that it shuts down or it stops functioning for some reason, that would mean that all this communication that is going from PLCs to up to the HMIs and to the historians, that will be disrupted, and we don't want that either. So all this discussion was to make a point about there are only two considerations at play when we talk about active scanning. One is availability. Second is deterministic communication. All right. So what else is at play in this whole thing? What is the issue? Fine, this is a communication network, and IT has a similar environment. It has computers and switches, a lot more switches maybe. So what's the issue over here? Why can't we overload the network, and what would cause the PLC to shut down? In most cases, nothing will happen, in most cases. But there are certain scenarios where, especially if you have some legacy components or some legacy PLCs, legacy controllers, legacy network devices installed on your facility or the facility you're working on, they may not be very, they may be more susceptible to responding to network packets getting to the network ports. I've shown a PLC over here. This is a very old PLC from Allen Bradley. Now it's called Rockwell Automation. And look at this port over here. This is I think it's a 15 pin port. This is an Ethernet port. This is not even RJ45. This is a 15 pin port, but still an Ethernet network port. So this is the level of legacy that we're talking about. I'm sure we can all discuss that how many facilities in the world has this PLC installed, and I would say quite a bit. Yeah. So you will still see a lot of those legacy PLCs that have either a very old Ethernet port, or even if you have this particular PLC, I have myself observed installed in certain facilities. So this is firsthand. These ports are 10/100 MB. Most of the IT guys, if it's anything less than 1 gig, they think it's too slow. Even 1 gig is too slow to everybody. So these legacy components, their ability to process traffic is limited by quite a few things, not just by the port speed, but also from the perspective of how internally the firmware and the network driver, how many packets it can process at a time. Similarly, you will see a lot of slow, either legacy components or slower networks. So this is just a Ethernet hub. I don't know how many of you have actually used an Ethernet hub. It's not even a switch. So folks who understand networks would understand the difference between a hub and a switch. This is also not a networking class, so you can look it up. But the hubs, they're not smart enough to figure out which device is connected to which port. There's no ARP table to figure out where each IP address is. These are dumb devices, but still used quite frequently, I have seen in industrial control systems, especially at the lower level, especially at this level. You will see a lot of these either hub type devices, network devices, Ethernet hubs, or even if they're Ethernet switches, they're unmanaged switches with very limited functionality in terms of the switching. So legacy components, slower networks. These devices, if you throw a lot of packets on them, they may stop functioning. That's basically the part where I said that if you go to the PLC, you may make it crash, blue screen of death, even though it doesn't have any blue screen. But to make it crash, if you throw a lot of packets simultaneously on this port, it cannot handle it. It may go into some kind of a fault mode, the CPU. Again, the probability is low. Most control systems, most newer control systems wouldn't have that problem, but there may be some control systems out there which may have this condition where if you throw a lot of packets on them, then they may crash. And also, if you have slower network devices which support maybe 10 or 100 MB communication, then those may not be able to respond to lots and lots of traffic that is thrown at them simultaneously. And worst case scenario, which again I have observed personally, you may have some redundant networks, and I'll show a screen over here for a typical ring topology. And in control systems, it's very common. I've seen literally within the past year in some of the high-end refineries at the lowest level of PLC communication, they have some kind of a ring, Ethernet ring, where the switches are connected in a ring topology using redundant spanning tree protocol, RSTP. Another problem with this protocol, if not properly configured, this protocol is very sensitive. It can cause disruption to the communication happening across the devices. If RSTP is not properly configured, and if the switches receive certain kind of traffic, it may disrupt the communication that is happening across these devices. So what will happen if the communication is disrupted? Either it's going to affect the deterministic communication, or it will affect the availability. All these scenarios that I'm telling you, these are not fictitious. These are not just coming from textbooks. These are real use cases that I have personally observed and experienced, not like 20, 30 years ago, but in the last couple of years or few years. So in a nutshell, we need to protect two things. Number one, we need to make sure that we don't throw a lot of traffic. This is basically the gist of this part of the presentation, that we need to try and prevent a lot of traffic going on to these PLCs, especially if we know that there are some legacy PLCs out there. And I'm using the term PLC as in general. It could be other controllers, other control system equipment, which do not have the capacity to handle so much traffic. If we throw a lot of packets at them, they may not be very happy about it. Similarly, if you have such sensitive networks, and this is just one example of network, if you, for example, throw a lot of broadcast traffic, okay, then the network may momentarily, for a few seconds, like 2, 3 seconds, 4 seconds, they may just stop the communication going through them. In an IT world, it's not a big deal. If I'm loading a web page, if it takes 4 seconds instead of 1 second, it's going to be annoying, but not a big deal. In the OT world, it can be a big deal and may impact the facility. So now that we understand how these two things work, let's exactly go further deeper into what do we mean by throwing a lot of traffic at these PLCs or throwing a lot of traffic on the network. Because ultimately our goal is we want to do this active scanning. We want to light matchsticks. We want to jump around, just like I said in the first page, that these things can be done if done right. So if we understand exactly what happens on the network when we do these scanning, use these scanning tools, we may be able to fine tune them to the extent that, okay, well, even with legacy devices and even with slower networks, we may still be able to do the so-called scan. So to demonstrate that, I have a short demo, not a demo, a real actually workshop. I have basically two virtual machines, one acting as a PC and one acting as a PLC. What I'll do is that I'll run Nmap over here and I'll run Wireshark over here. All right, and I'll run some active scanning commands on Nmap and see what this PLC sees, what the PLC received, what type of traffic it receives. And then we'll see what I can do with those Nmap commands to make them such that the PLC doesn't get negatively affected. So once again, a PLC and a PC having Nmap running with some active scanning commands that I'll execute, and Wireshark running on a pretend PLC, and it will show you what packets the PLC is receiving. All right, so I'll switch to my environment, and this is, so I need to make it a little bit more suitable for the display, so give me a second. I will move this up here. So you can see that I have Nmap, Zenmap running on one of these. And where is my PLC? I hope that it's connected. Yeah, beautiful, it works. Don't you love it when things work? All right, so this is my so-called PLC, and I'm running Wireshark on it. So I will start capturing the traffic, and then I will move it down so you all can see the traffic as well. Nice and beautiful. All right, so let's move this down, make it shorter down here. Okay, so the top one is my PC, and the bottom one is supposedly the PLC, which is, you can see it up here, which is going to receive the traffic. So you can see that I'm actually capturing the traffic from on the PLC. So right now you will see, I'll stop this communication and then I'll start it again, capturing the packets. As you can see, there's not much going on. The PLC is not receiving any packets because, a little bit here and there, ICMP, but nothing drastic. You can see the timestamp on the left. Those of you who are familiar with Wireshark, pardon me, but I need to explain it to those who haven't used it. You have the timestamp on the left over here, and then it is just showing what type of communication, what type of packets it is receiving from any outside device on the network. So right now you can see that, okay, at 12:28:15, it's a UTC time, whatever the time zone is, but it received some packets, and after that, it's been about maybe 20 seconds, 30 seconds, and no other packets. So what I'll do is I'll go to the top device here, and let me just launch the command prompt, and I'll just ping it. So I'll say ping. My PLC is 192.168.9.22. As soon as I hit enter, you will see that, no, I didn't like it. Why didn't it receive any packets? Because I pinged myself, my bad. I was supposed to ping 11. All right. So you can see that on the bottom screen, the PLC is receiving some packets. It receives some ICMP ping commands from 9.22, and it responded to it, and then it's quiet again. Now, I've done ping like hundreds of times, maybe thousands of times on control systems. I've even done ping/t, so that would be a continuous ping without any issue with the PLC. Why? Because ping command by default, it sends a command every second. So you can see on the left bottom over here, 38 second, 39 second, 40 second, 41 second. So if I send a command to the PLC every 1 second, the PLC seems to be okay. It doesn't mind. I'm saying this, hey, who are you? And it's saying, okay, I am 192.168.9.11. So let's try and make it a little bit more challenging for the PLC. I'll just refresh this so that the Wireshark becomes blank. What I'll do is I'll say 192.168.19.11, and I'll do a very basic Nmap command called ping scan and see what the PLC receives. So Fine, it was broadcast traffic. It was an ARP protocol command. It was not really a ping ICMP. It was an ARP, but that's fine. It was one command and that's it. So PLC is happy. It doesn't mind that because if you ask it a question, in fact, the HMI or the SCADA server is continuously asking those questions to the PLC. It's saying, give me the data, give me the data, give me the data every second, and the PLC is responding. It's happy, no problem. So what is the issue? The issue is that in most cases, when you're doing scanning, people try to do this intense scan. Let me just scan the network and see what you see down here. Observe what you see down here. It's going to take a few seconds. There you go. So you see what's happening down here. Within a second, and I'll scroll up, within a second, the PLC received hundreds of packets, hundreds of requests. And the intense scan of Nmap, it asks for different TCP ports and different protocols and all those things. So within 1 second, you can see 12 is the hour, 31 minutes, 56.471 second, 56.471 second. Within a second, it received hundreds of packets. All right. So this is something that a legacy PLC, which is not very, I guess, smart in the sense that it doesn't have the bandwidth to accept and process so many packets, it may not like it, and it may decide that I'm going to go to sleep, I'm going to crash. So what we have done is that we have shown that a simple ping command or a simple ping scan, the simplest form of active scanning, doesn't send so many traffics to the PLC, so much traffic to the PLC that could cause it to malfunction. But if we do an intense scan, if you send a lot of packets simultaneously, then it could say that I cannot respond to so many packets, so I don't like it. So what do we do? Because I do need to do an intense scan or something called a detailed scan because I need to get a lot of information. For example, you can see that the information that I've received is quite interesting that, the MAC address and the device type and it's Microsoft Windows and the operating system details and even, which ports are open, which ones are not open, quite detailed information that I'm getting from the PLC or from the other device. So maybe I do need to do an intense scan. Maybe I do need all that information that an intense scan provides to me. So what do? I need the information, but if I run the scan, the PLC may not like it, or there may be a risk. Maybe it will not like it. I don't want to take a chance and be the one who shuts down the facility. So the easiest thing to do is, if I slow it down, this T over here is the timing. So let's say I make it T1. I don't know if it's the right command or not, but let's see. Let's see what happens to the PLC now on the bottom. Let's see what type of packets it receives. All right, so maybe I made it too slow, but let's see. It got one packet at 12:34, 40 seconds. And then it's waiting and waiting and waiting. And then after about 16 seconds, another command is received by the PLC. After another 5 seconds, another command. We'll probably wait a few, maybe 10 seconds, maybe another 10 seconds, another command. So what we've done is that we are still using the same commands that are okay to run in even with a legacy PLC, because legacy PLC is still, if it supports Ethernet protocol, it would be able to respond to those packets. It's just that it just cannot handle lots of packets at the same time. So if I slow down the communication, if I just send one request at a time, every, let's say 5 seconds or 10 seconds, however much I want to slow it down. So we have taken out that variable from the equation, that lots of packets, PLC doesn't like it. One packet at a time, one command at a time, PLC would be okay with that. Of course, it's going to take a long time. My previous scan that I did, the intense scan without the timing, it took maybe about 10 seconds. This one, my guess is going to take about, I don't know, 10 minutes or so. But that's fine. At the end of the day, you're not in a hurry that I need to get all the information within a second. That's not the goal. The goal is that you just want to collect all the useful information, for instance, that an intense scan can provide. So are you okay with waiting 5 minutes for that information? Or do you want to shut down the plant? Even if there is a very minute risk, minute chance, 1% chance that maybe the PLC may not like so many commands at the same time, do you want to take that chance? If not, then how about just slow down the commands, send one command at a time, or whatever the different, Nmap has lots and lots of different variations that you can do. And then, yeah, run it, go have some tea, have lunch, come back, and you will still have all the data without a risk to the facility. So this is basically coming back to the discussion here of our presentation, that this is what we were talking about, that all we are trying to do is that we're just trying to slow down the communication. Most PLCs wouldn't mind. I cannot think of any PLC who would mind receiving a packet of network scan every 5 seconds, because the other communication is most likely happening every 1 second or even every half second. So if I send one request every 5 seconds, the PLC would be okay with that. Similarly, if I go back to my so-called RSTP or complex ring network, even on this network, I said that if you have lots of traffic coming over here or certain traffic coming over here, typically if you send broadcast traffic to a ring and the RSTP is not properly configured, you will run into problems in terms of communication across these devices, across the network. So if you understand what your environment is, if you know that there are ring or RSTP protocol running on certain switches on your network, don't use broadcast traffic. Use the scanning tools or scanning software and fine tune it in a way that it still works without disrupting the communication or the availability of your control system. So in a nutshell, what we're talking about is that active scanning, absolutely, it can be done. Whoever says that active scanning is a no-go, I don't agree with that. It is perfectly okay to do active scanning without negatively impacting OT systems. No problem whatsoever. As long as you know your environment. Do you have any RSTP? Do you have any ring topology? Do you have any legacy PLCs? Even determine the risk for your environment. Hey, you know, this particular network, because in control systems, we have different, you may have like 50, 60 separate networks. Each network, you should know what the risk is. Is it a safety system? Is any communication happening between PLCs? Or is it just communication between PLCs and HMI? If it is only between PLC and HMI, it's okay if it's a 1 second delay. But if there is communication happening between PLCs, you don't mess with that, yeah? Use the right tools and techniques. Don't just install, okay, let me download ZenMap or Nmap and do intense scan. No, use the right tools and techniques. And most importantly, slow down the scanning, just like we did. Instead of sending 1,000 packets in 1 second, send 1 second, Instead of sending 1,000 packets per second, send one packet every 5 seconds, for example, or one request or one command every 5 seconds, and it would be perfectly okay with the PLC. And don't go crazy like I did. Why did I do that? Because it's fun. When I did that, I saw a lot of red and yellow and green, and I love colors, so it's a lot of fun. So let me just do it. Let me try intense scan. No, perform only the type of scanning that is required for the information, for the data that you need. So this is basically the takeaway from this session. I'll stop over here and open the forum to questions, please. All right. So question, is there any passive exploitation thing exist in OT pen testing? How can we do PT in passive mode? The only PT in OT is limited to traffic analysis. So it's a question for my previous webinar that was on the topic of um, PT and OT environment. So I'll just quickly address it that PT is the takeaway from that webinar was that PT is a sensitive topic anyway. When you do traffic analysis, it's not really PT. You're just doing vulnerability analysis. You're just doing vulnerability assessment. And that was the whole gist of last webinar, that VA and PT, while they're interrelated, but they're still different. PT is pen testing. You have to do active exploitation. Otherwise, it's not a pen testing. It is just vulnerability analysis. When doing a PT, do we need to review the configurations of the SCADAs and PLCs? Am I reading the questions for the previous webinar? No, it's okay. It's okay to ask questions. That's fine. When doing a PT, do we need to review the configurations of the SCADAs and PLCs? The session I will do in October will talk about configuration, what is the impact of PLC programming on these attack techniques. So that's a very long answer. I'll skip that for today. Hopefully you'll join me in October as well. Next, please. Next. For career path, what are the best certifications for pen testing, especially in OT world? Well, I would skip that for now. Maybe I can answer that question one-on-one for you. All right. Another question. So if pen testing is okay, why are people scared of it? Well, because of the perceived risk. What you see on my slide, that itself is the challenge. If you don't know your environment, first of all, if you don't understand why active scanning is hazardous for OT environment, then of course, if you don't know something, you're going to be scared of it. And the second part, even if you understand how active scanning works, but if you don't have these 4 points that are on the screen, know your OT environment, determine the risk, use the right tools. If you don't follow these, then yeah, people are going to be scared of it. Nobody wants to be the person who caused the shutdown in a plant. I don't want to be that person. So if you don't know how it works, then definitely you would be cautious about not using it. What are the guidelines for layer 2 network switches, especially 10 Mbps? Should be included in PT as well. Lots of questions about PT. Layer 2 switches, I don't think that layer 2 switches have anything to do with PT in the sense that they're just layer 2 switch, they're just switching the traffic. So if you're already on the network, it doesn't matter if the switch is layer 2 or how it's operating, unless you actually want to get inside the switch and change the VLAN configuration or something like that, depending upon how sophisticated the switch is. I don't think layer 2 switch has anything to do with PT. Another question, the question is, how can I start my career in OT security? I'm interested to transition. Okay, so a lot of people, they want to get into OT security, which is good because we do need resources in OT security. I actually have a separate webinar for that as well. What we'll do is I'll answer these questions separately because they're not directly related to the topic. So I'll skip that for now. One more question up there. Active scanning requires knowing each asset's CIA levels, but legacy system often lack this documentation. Doesn't this requirement effectively preclude active scanning in most? I don't think you need, I don't know what CIA level for each device is. Maybe it does exist. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but the confidentiality, integrity, availability is not something that is per device. If I have a PLC, again, PLC 5/20E installed on a bagging machine, there is no CIA of the device itself, of the asset itself. It's about the function it is performing, the data it has. So it's not about the CIA, it's about, can that device handle the traffic that I'm throwing at it? If it can, by all means, throw the traffic, because all you're doing is sending out commands, asking questions to gather information. Who cares if the PLC has X level of CIA or Y level? It doesn't matter. What you're trying to do is gather information. All you want to know, if I ask this PLC lots of questions, will it crash? Will it crumble? If no, go ahead and do the scanning. How frequently should we do scanning? Any standard guidelines. You can scan every day, every night. If you do it for fun like me, I would like to do it all the time. But you should do it only when it is actually required. That's what I say in my slide as well, that perform only the type of scanning required or when it's required. If you need to collect certain, let's say your organization's policy is that every month you will scan the network and gather the information of all the devices and then compare it with the asset inventory you have to make sure that there is no unauthorized device on the network, then do it once a month. If your policy is to do it once a week, do it once a week. So it's not about a guideline or a standard that says thou shall only do it once a week. It depends on your need. Do it once a day, no problem, as long as you take the precautions that are on the screen. Next question, what kind of controls can be implemented if PLC network is too old? To protect, I'm assuming the question is to protect it from unauthorized scanning. I'm trying to relate the question to the topic. The question itself is, what kind of controls can be implemented if PLC network is too old? If you don't want too much traffic to go to that network itself, and you are able to isolate that network, for example, put another device, a traffic control device, maybe a layer 3 switch or something, in between that network and the rest of the network. So if your organization has a SCADA network with 1 gig switches and one small additional network is 10 MB, then in between put a bandwidth control device that doesn't allow traffic beyond a certain bandwidth. Or you can even put a firewall over there and limit the kind of traffic that goes to that particular network. So you can say, hey, ICMP traffic, ping command should not go to the other side. ARP should not go to the other side. Broadcast should not go to that network. So yes, you can isolate that network so that additional or unwanted traffic doesn't even reach that network. The only scanning tool is Nmap. What other tools you recommend for scanning? Lots and lots of out there. I like Nmap because it's free, it's basic, it's simple, and it does the job. But if you want very advanced information, like if you want to detect vulnerability as well, for example, Nessus it scans the network and it detects not just the network information, the device information, but also it provides you vulnerability information. But you have to keep in mind that the more information you ask for, that means the more the amount of traffic you're sending on the network or to the device. So be careful with that. Just because a tool is nice and shiny, it says it gives you all the information. I'm sure they do, but do you need all that information? Do you want to take a risk, take a chance of putting your PLC's legacy systems or the networks under stress just because you want some shiny piece of information? There has to be a need for it. If you have the need and you have done the determination, you have done the risk assessment, go ahead, do it. Lots of good questions. I'll just take a couple of more. Do we have environments or OEM agreements that actually permit active scanning, or our current contracts don't include such clause documented anywhere? So the OEM problem is a different problem. OEMs don't explicitly allow active scanning. It is just that if you have SLA with them in terms of that they're maintaining the network and the system, for example, if it's a DCS environment, and if it's Yokogawa, Honeywell, Emerson, whichever vendor it is, if they're the ones responsible for maintaining your facility, then you better consult with them before you do anything on the network, because ultimately they're responsible for maintaining it, and you do something that brings something crashing, they're not going to be happy about it. Other than that, the OEMs, let's say Rockwell or Schneider, why would they care if you run active scanning on the network, on your own network? At the end of the day, it's your facility, your network. If it shuts down the network itself, when we talk about uh, too much traffic crashing the PLC, it's not gonna make the PLC go, it's not gonna break the PLC. It'll just be a blue screen of death type crashing, and you reboot it and then it works fine. So why would the OEMs care what you did to their PLC, especially if it's already obsolete, not under warranty, it's 30 years old, they don't care. But people who care are your operations and your management. You shut down the plant, you're in trouble. All right, one last question. All right, so I'll skip that part. Let's leave it at that. I appreciate all the interactive, I guess, discussion, all the nice questions. I enjoyed the session. So look forward to seeing all of you in the next month's session, which is on the screen now. The topic is why asset management is the foundation of OT cybersecurity. I've had another session in the past about difference between asset discovery and asset management. But today, this next session, we're going to talk about why asset management is the foundation of OT security. So it'll be on 30th September, same time, 3 p.m. KSA. You can scan the QR code and register for it, or just send an email to the email address up there. Thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you, Mubarak. Thank you for the informative webinar. As always, thanks.